The night my family threw me out, I had a company worth $3.2 million that not one of them had ever thought to ask about. My sister screamed about a car loan. My mother nodded. My father packed my bag. I stood there and thought, this is the most expensive mistake they will ever make. Let me start from 4 hours earlier. The conference room on the 11th floor of Meridian Group's downtown Portland office had a wall of windows facing west, and at 4:47 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in October, the sky was doing that particular thing Pacific Northwest skies do in fall gray, going purple, going gray again, like it couldn't decide. My manager, Dennis, sat across from me with an HR folder and the careful expression of a man who has delivered this speech before and hated it every time. I already knew what was in the folder. I'd known for 6 weeks the way you know a storm is coming because the air pressure drops and the birds go quiet. Meridian had been bleeding contracts since spring. The restructure was inevitable. My position, senior financial analyst, 8 years, 2 promotions, was not. Dennis said the word eliminated. He said position before it to soften the blow. He mentioned severance. 8 weeks, full benefits through the end of the year. His hands stayed flat on the table the whole time, palms down, the body language of a man trying very hard not to look like a threat. I thanked him. That was the professional thing to do, and I was a professional. Silence is a position, and gratitude is a better one. What I did not tell Dennis, because it was none of his business, I had a meeting on Thursday with my attorney, Kevin Hartley, about an acquisition offer for a company I'd co-founded 4 years ago. What I did not mention, the term sheet in my email, which I had read 3 times that week. What I did not say, I had already begun to think of Meridian Group in the past tense. I drove home on the Sunset Highway with the folder on my passenger seat. The acquisition paperwork was on my kitchen counter. The numbers, if Thursday went the way I expected, were significant. My family did not know about any of it. Pat Reed makes rotisserie chicken on Tuesdays. Has for 20 years, or close to it. Grocery store bird, usually from the Safeway on Canyon Road, with green beans from a can and dinner rolls from the freezer section. I grew up eating it, and even now, pulling into the driveway of the house I'd moved back into 8 months ago, a temporary arrangement, just until I found the right apartment, everyone had agreed the smell of it hit me through the garage door. Automatic, molecular. The sensation of arriving somewhere that is supposed to be safe. Amber's Honda CR-V was in the driveway next to my mother's Accord. Both of them home. 3 things I noticed walking in that order. The kitchen table already set, the television off unusual, and my father's hands folded in front of him, the way he folds them when he has made a decision and is waiting to announce it. I sat down. I said, I have some news about work. I said, Meridian is restructuring. My position is being eliminated. I did not finish the sentence. Amber's face changed not to concern, not to the soft rearranging of features that would say, are you okay? Are you scared? What do you need it changed to something else? Something faster and more reflexive than sympathy. She said, who's going to pay my car loan now? The table went quiet. My mother set her fork down, not dropped it. Set it deliberately, at the edge of her plate. She looked at Amber, and then she looked at me, and I watched her decide something. My father's hands stayed folded. I'm good at reading a room. It's the skill you develop when you grow up as the daughter who figures things out, the one who keeps track, the one you call when the numbers don't add up. I read that room in the time it took to exhale. 3 things became clear, in that order. Amber's car loan, $610 a month, a Honda CR-V she'd financed without a cosigner, only because I'd vouched for her income to the dealership, had never actually lived inside Amber's budget. My parents had been counting on my presence in this house the way a building counts on a load-bearing wall, and the moment that wall appeared to crack, they did not ask if the wall was okay. My mother said, it's just temporary, honey, until you get back on your feet. She said it gently. That was the thing about my mother, she was always gentle when she had already made up her mind. The gentleness was not reassurance. It was the closing of a door, padded so you wouldn't hear the click. My father unfolded his hands. He pushed back from the table. He said, in the voice he used for decisions that had already been made, your sister needs this house more than you do right now. You're resourceful, Danielle. You always figure it out. He went upstairs. I sat at the table with my mother and my sister. Amber was picking at her dinner roll. She didn't look at me. My mother refilled her water glass. I heard the zipper of my duffel bag from upstairs, the sound of drawers opening. My father had been in my room exactly 3 times in the 2 years before I moved back, once to fix the ceiling fan, twice to help with furniture, and now he was in it packing my things on a Tuesday night because his other daughter needed the house more. I have spent a lot of time in the months since turning that sound over. The zipper, the drawers, the fact that he knew where everything was, which means he must have looked. He came downstairs with the bag and carried it to the front porch without meeting my eyes. That was the part I keep coming back to. Not the words were bad, but words are something you can answer. It was the eyes, the deliberate absence of them. The porch light was on. The street was quiet, the way Beaverton is quiet at 6 in the evening in October. A few cars, a dog somewhere, the sky the color of old concrete. I picked up the bag. I thought about Thursday, about Kevin's office in the Pearl District, the 14th floor, the view of the city I'd built my career inside. I thought about the term sheet and the number on it, and the folder still sitting on my passenger seat. My family had just handed me my bag and told me to figure it out. I had spent 6 months building the exit. I just hadn't known they'd be the ones to open the door. Marcus Webb has lived in the same apartment on NW Lovejoy for 6 years, and the first thing he does when you arrive in crisis is make tea. Not ask if you want tea, not offer. He fills the kettle and puts it on, and by the time you've sat down and taken your coat off, there's a mug in front of you. Yorkshire Gold, 2 minutes steep, a little milk. He learned to make it from a British colleague years ago and never switched back. I sat on his couch with the duffel bag at my feet and told him what happened. I kept it sequential. The conference room, Dennis, the folder, the drive home on the Sunset Highway, the table, Amber's first question, which had not been a question about me. Marcus sat across from me in the armchair he's had since grad school, the one with the arm that's been reglued twice, and he listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. He looked at his own mug. Then he said, "Danielle, you've been their emergency exit for 15 years. The second you needed the door, they changed the lock." I stared at the tea. I didn't answer. Not because the sentence wasn't accurate, it was, but because something about hearing it out loud made it heavier than it had been inside my own head, where I'd been carrying it for years without naming it. I said I'd figure out the apartment situation this week. Marcus said, "Okay." We sat there for a while with the rain starting against his windows. And I thought about 2005. I was 15 the summer my father's construction supply company went under. I know the technical word for what happened: over-leveraged, undercapitalized, caught on the wrong side of a slowdown in commercial building permits because I looked it up afterward, because understanding the mechanism was the only thing that helped me stop being afraid of it. What I remember of that summer, the way my parents' voices changed when they thought I was asleep, the calls that came before 8 in the morning, my father sitting at the kitchen table at midnight with papers spread out around him, not touching them, just sitting. The particular stillness of a man who has run out of ideas and is waiting for a different one to arrive. August. I came downstairs at 6 in the morning to get water and heard him tell my mother they might lose the house. He didn't know I'd heard. I went back upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed, and I did what I did when I needed to think. I counted. The money in my savings account from 18 months of bagging groceries at the Safeway on Canyon Road, $212. What the mortgage payment was, roughly, from the envelope I'd seen on the counter. I didn't know exactly, but more than that. A lot more. I put $200 in an envelope. I wrote for the mortgage on the outside. And I left it on his pillow before he was up. He cashed it. I know because the envelope was gone by evening, and the next morning he was quieter in a different way, not the stillness of a man who had run out of ideas, but the stillness of a man who had received help from somewhere he wasn't going to mention. He cashed it the next month too. And the month after that, 11 months, $200 each, until the company debt was restructured and the immediate crisis passed. He never asked where it came from. I never said. I learned something that year. Silence was not gratitude. Silence was convenience. Read Analytics, LLC. 4 years ago, when I was 30, my colleague Trevor Nash had built a financial modeling tool for regional banks, the kind of software that predicted loan default risk with more accuracy than anything the mid-sized banks could afford to license from the big vendors. Good product. The problem was, Trevor was an engineer, not a business person, and he had no capital and no idea how to find any. I had savings. I had the specific competence to understand exactly what he'd built and what it was worth. I took 60% equity in exchange for both. Why 60 and not 50? Because I wanted control. I had spent enough of my professional life deferring to rooms full of people who were confident rather than correct. 60% meant the decisions were mine. I put Reed Analytics in my name because it was my capital and my risk. I kept it quiet at home for the same reason I had kept the $200 quiet in 2005. The moment my family knew I had resources, those resources became theirs to allocate. That was not a cynical assessment. It was a 15-year empirical observation. 3 years ago, the LLC's first full profit year, I took a distribution of $340,000. I bought the house in Cannon Beach, coast property, a 2-bedroom on a bluff above the beach, cedar-sided, the kind of place that smells like salt and Douglas, fir and old wood heat. I titled it solely in my name. My mother stayed there twice. She mentioned, both times, that her friend's beach house was just lovely. "Danielle, you should really find something like that someday." I said I would look into it. 6 weeks before the night my father packed my bag, a mid-size fintech company out of Austin, called Meridian's competitor, actually sent a letter of intent to acquire Reed Analytics LLC. The offer, $3.2 million for the full company. I retained Kevin Hartley that same week. Kevin is the kind of attorney who reads everything twice and asks the question you hoped he wouldn't, and I have trusted him with my financial life for 3 years for exactly that reason. He reviewed the term sheet, ran the numbers, identified 2 structural issues we spent a week correcting, and told me we were looking at a clean close in 45 to 60 days. I built a clause into the deal structure. Kevin called it a family buyout option. What it meant in practice, if I activated it before closing, $180,000 of the acquisition proceeds would redirect into escrow, payable in 2 disbursements, $167,000 to my parents' mortgage servicer, which would pay off the remaining balance on the house in Beaverton, $13,000 to Amber, which would retire the Honda CR-V loan with 4 months to spare. I had not told my family because I wanted to tell them at dinner. I had imagined it several times, the table, the food, the way my mother would set down her fork, the look on my father's face. Thursday's meeting with Kevin was to finalize the paperwork and prepare for signing. 2 things I knew. Driving away from that house with my duffel bag in the back seat, the rain starting in earnest on the Sunset Highway, the city lights smearing across my windshield. 1, they had no idea what they had just done. 2, I was the only person in that driveway who did. Marcus's couch has a particular quality I've never been able to name, something between firm and forgiving, the way couches get when they've absorbed enough late nights to develop a memory. I lay on it at 11 o'clock Tuesday, with a blanket he'd left folded over the arm, and looked at the ceiling fan turning slow in the dark, and I cataloged what I had: the duffel bag, my car, my laptop, which I'd had the presence of mind to grab from my room before my father finished coming downstairs, my phone, Kevin's number, the term sheet in my email, which I had not deleted, which I had in fact read 3 times in the past week, while sitting in the Meridian parking garage eating lunch, because I didn't want anyone at the office seeing it on my screen. What I did not have: a place to live after this week, a salary starting Monday, a clear answer to the question Marcus had asked gently, carefully, the way he asked things about whether I was okay. I told him I was fine. He turned off the light in the hallway and went to bed. I lay there for maybe 20 minutes. The rain had stopped. Someone on the street below was walking a dog, the click of nails on pavement, and then that was gone too, and the apartment was the particular quiet of a city that hasn't fully gone to sleep. I got up, put my shoes on, and went down to the parking garage. I sat in my car for 8 minutes. I know because I checked the clock when I got in and again when I got out. I put my hands flat on the steering wheel, palms down, and I breathed. That was all I did. The parking garage smelled like exhaust and damp concrete, and the faint industrial sweetness of the drain cleaner the management company used on Tuesdays, which I knew because I'd parked here a dozen times visiting Marcus, and it always smelled like that on Tuesday nights. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. Not because crying would have been wrong, but because it wasn't what happened. What happened was something in my chest that felt like a fist, opening and closing, and I breathed against it until it stopped. 8 minutes. Then I picked up my phone and texted Kevin. "Still on for Thursday?" His response came in under 2 minutes. "Of course. You okay?" I typed, "I will be." Sent it. Put the phone face down on the passenger seat and sat there 1 more minute, looking at nothing in particular. I didn't answer his question. Silence is a position, and "I will be" was a better one. Wednesday. I was at a coffee shop on NW 23rd by 8:15, with my laptop open and a large drip coffee I didn't taste. I booked a furnished studio in NW Portland, 2 blocks from the coffee shop. As it happened, a month-to-month lease. Move-in Friday, $1,850 a month. The photos showed clean floors and a window that faced a courtyard. That was enough. Then I opened my bank's website and spent 45 minutes removing myself from everything I'd set up at the Beaverton address. The bill pay account linked to the family's internet service, which I'd put in my name 3 years ago when Comcast gave my parents trouble and I'd fixed it and never moved it back. The recurring transfer to my parents' mortgage servicer, $400 a month, 4 years running, something I'll come back to. I left that one for the moment. I needed to think about it. The electric bill notification that came to my email address, the Amazon household account. 4 things total. It took 45 minutes because I wanted to be careful, and because careful is how I do things. I emailed HR at Meridian to confirm the severance processing timeline. At 9:47, a text from my father. "Call your mother." I read it. I put the phone back down. I ordered a second coffee and opened the acquisition term sheet and read it again. The whole thing, every clause, even the ones I'd already read until I knew the language by memory. I find it clarifying, sometimes, to read something you know, the precision of it, the way every term means exactly what it says. I did not call my mother. His silence after packing my bag had been a position. Mine was the same. Marcus made pasta Wednesday night, the box kind with jarred marinara, which he is unembarrassed about in a way I have always found quietly admirable. He poured 2 glasses of wine, and we ate at his kitchen table, and he waited until we were almost done before he asked, "What are you going to do about Thursday?" I set down my fork. I told him about the family clause, the whole thing, the way I hadn't told anyone except Kevin. The $180,000 redirect. What it would have covered, what I had imagined in detail about telling them at a dinner table, not unlike this one. Marcus went very still in the way he goes, still when he's processing something he didn't expect. He's not a man who performs reactions. He held his wine glass and looked at it. "So you were going to give them the exit," he said. "And they handed you a bag before you could." "Yes." He set the glass down. "And now?" I didn't answer immediately. I counted 3 seconds I do that. When I'm deciding something, run a quick internal count. It slows the part of me that wants to move before I've finished thinking. "I have a meeting tomorrow," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded. He picked up his fork and finished his pasta. And he didn't push further, and I have trusted Marcus Webb with my professional life for 9 years. For exactly that quality, he knows the difference between a door left open and a door that's closed. We did the dishes together. He lent me a clean towel and a phone charger and told me the couch was mine as long as I needed it. I said I'd be in a new apartment by Friday. He said, "Good." Thursday. I was on the Burnside Bridge at 7:40 with my travel mug and the acquisition folder on the passenger seat, driving toward Kevin's office in the Pearl District, the Willamette Gray and flat below. The city was doing what Portland does on October mornings. Everything damp, everything muted. The sky, the color of old drywall, the coffee carts already open. I parked in the garage on 10th, sat in the car. 30 seconds, not 8 minutes, I was past 8 minutes. My phone showed 1 new voicemail. Pat. I looked at it. I didn't play it. I put the phone in my coat pocket and got out of the car and walked to the elevator. The elevator took 11 seconds. I counted. Kevin Hartley's office is on the 14th floor of a building in the Pearl District that was a warehouse in a previous life and still carries the bones of it: high ceilings, exposed steel, windows that run floor to ceiling on the north wall. On a clear day, you can see Mount Hood from his desk. That Thursday was not a clear day. The sky was the same flat gray it had been all week. And the city below looked small and muffled, the way Portland looks when the clouds come down close. He had coffee waiting. He always has coffee waiting. I've wondered sometimes if he brews a fresh pot before every meeting, or if he's simply always in a state of having just made coffee, and I've never asked, because it seems like the kind of thing that would be less interesting with an answer. I sat across from him. He opened the folder. The acquisition deal had 4 main components, and Kevin walked me through each one with the methodical patience that is his particular professional gift. Not slow, never condescending, just thorough in the way that makes you feel the ground is solid under each step before you take the next one. The letter of intent, signed. The representations and warranties, clean. The IP assignment schedule, which had taken us most of a week to get right, now correct. The closing timeline, 45 days from today, assuming no material changes. Everything was in order. He reached for the second folder, thinner than the first. He slid a single document across the table and set his pen beside it. The family buyout option, 3 pages. I had written the first draft of the concept myself, in a coffee shop on a Sunday in August, before I'd even retained Kevin. He'd cleaned up the language and added the escrow mechanism and asked me once whether I was certain about the structure. I'd said yes. He pointed to the signature line on page 3. This is the family buyout option, he said. Sign here, it activates. The $180,000 redirect goes into escrow, payable to the beneficiaries you specified, Patricia and Gary Reed for the mortgage balance, Amber Reed for the vehicle loan. He looked up. You want me to execute this one too? I picked up the document. I read the first page. I had read it before, 4 times by that point, but I read it again. The language was precise, the way legal language is precise when someone has worked to make it so, rather than work to obscure it. Every term meant what it said. I turned to page 2. I counted the paragraphs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I thought about my father's voice at the kitchen table. Your sister needs this house more than you do right now. The decision voice. The voice he used when he had already made up his mind and was simply notifying the room. I thought about Amber at the top of the stairs, watching, not coming down. The specific quality of choosing to stay where you are when staying where you are is a decision. I thought about my mother's hands on the coffee cup, flat, deliberate, the hands of a woman managing the temperature of the situation. I thought about an envelope on a pillow in 2005, and the sound of a zipper in a room I hadn't been invited into, and 11 months of $200 deposits that were received in silence because silence was more convenient than acknowledgement. I set the document down. Kevin waited. He is good at waiting. It is, in my experience, the rarest professional skill, the ability to hold a silence without filling it, without shifting in your chair or adding a clarifying sentence or finding something to do with your hands. He just waited. Remove it, I said. He looked at me for one moment. Not long. You're sure? It wasn't a question. He knew it wasn't a question. I knew it wasn't a question. It was the last courtesy, the professional equivalent of a hand on a door before it closes. I'm sure. He pulled the document back across the table, made a note in the margin, set it in a separate pile, and moved to the next page of the main folder without ceremony, the way you move past a decision once it's made. We spent another 40 minutes on the remaining paperwork. I signed 7 things. Kevin walked me through each one. The coffee was good. When we shook hands at the door, he said we'd be in touch within the week, and I said thank you, and I took the elevator down 14 floors and walked out onto 10th Avenue into the gray October air. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. A delivery truck was idling at the corner. 2 women with strollers passed in front of me going north. A cyclist cut through the crosswalk against the light and didn't look back. I had expected to feel something I couldn't name, some version of loss or relief, or the particular weight that comes after a decision that can't be undone. What I felt instead was lighter, not happy, not vindicated, just lighter, the way you feel when you've been holding a door shut against something heavy and you finally step back and let it go. I had spent 6 months building that clause. I had imagined my parents' faces when I told them. I had imagined my mother setting down her fork and my father going quiet, and Amber for once having nothing to say. I had been carrying that imagined dinner around with me like an item on a to-do list, something to be completed, a debt I had decided to pay on their behalf before they even knew they owed it. The to-do list was shorter now. I walked to my car. I had 45 days until closing. I opened my phone, and for the first time in 3 years, I looked up apartments in Austin. The voicemail from my mother came on day 3. I was unpacking my duffel bag in the furnished studio on NW Lovejoy clean floors. A window facing the courtyard, a kitchen the size of a walk-in closet, which suited me fine since I have never been someone who uses a kitchen for anything more elaborate than coffee and reheated takeout. I'd gotten the keys Friday morning, moved my bag in Friday afternoon, and spent the weekend buying the specific things that make a temporary space livable. A good pillow, a French press, 2 sets of towels that weren't the scratchy kind. My phone showed a new voicemail. Pat Reed. I played it while folding a sweater. Her voice was careful in the way it got when she was managing the temperature of a situation from a distance. "Hi, honey, it's Mom. I hope you're okay. We haven't heard from you. Your sister's doing a lot better. I think the stress was really getting to her. Anyway, call me back when you can." I finished folding the sweater. I set the phone on the counter. She had called to report on her investment. I was still line item 1 in her household budget. She just needed to confirm I was still operating. The last sentence was the tell. "Your sister's doing a lot better. Not we miss you. Not your father wants to talk." The update she led with was Amber's condition, which meant Amber's condition was the thing she considered most relevant to me, which meant she had not yet understood that I had stopped considering it relevant at all. I did not call back. On day 14, I opened my bank's app and canceled the recurring transfer to my parents' mortgage servicer. $400 a month, 48 payments, $19,200 over 4 years, sent quietly and received in silence, because that was the arrangement we had all agreed to without ever discussing it. It took 3 clicks. 40 seconds, maybe. I put my phone face down on the desk and went back to the acquisition documents I'd been reviewing, a section on representations and warranties that Kevin had flagged for a second read. I thought about it once more that evening, briefly, the way you think about a thing you've set down in another room. Then I stopped thinking about it. The call from Amber came on day 21. She called at 6:47 in the evening, which was after dinner, which meant she'd thought about when to call. Amber thinks about when to call. She has always had good instincts for timing when to ask, when to wait, when to arrive somewhere already in progress, so the difficult part has been handled by someone else. I picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice was cheerful in the specific way it gets when she wants something, and has decided that cheerful is the right approach. "Hey Dan, you doing okay? I've been thinking about you." I said I was good. She said Mom and Dad were kind of stressed. She said she knew things had gotten weird. She said she thought it would really help if I came home for dinner, just to clear the air. 3 things her call was not: an apology, a reckoning, an acknowledgement that anything had happened at all. One thing it was: a recruitment. She needed me back in the house the way a system needs a missing component returned, not because she missed me, or not only because of that, but because my absence had created a problem she wanted solved, and she had decided that cheerful was the most efficient tool for solving it. "I can't make it," I said. "I mean, it doesn't have to be this week. We could do a Sunday, or—" "I can't make it, Amber." She went quiet. A different kind of quiet than I expected. Not hurt, exactly, but recalibrating. She had run the approach and gotten a result she hadn't modeled for. "Okay," she said. She hung up first. I set the phone down and looked out the window at the courtyard. A neighbor I'd never spoken to was sitting on a bench down there with a paperback, and a pigeon was walking in circles near the drain, and the evening light was doing the thing it does in Portland in late October, going gold for about 20 minutes before the gray comes back. I thought, she knows what she did. That was the thing the call confirmed, and the thing I'd been turning over since the night in the kitchen. Amber had not screamed about the car loan because she was thoughtless. She had screamed about it because she had calculated, in the few seconds between my first sentence and her response, that screaming about it was the fastest path to a resolution that didn't require her to absorb any of the cost. The calculation had been wrong, but the calculation had been made. On day 28, my father sent a text, "Call your mother," 2 words for her and 1 word for him, which was about the ratio that had always applied to communication in the Reed household. Pat's concerns got sentences, Gary's got delivery, he was the vehicle. The message wasn't his. I read it. I went back to the consulting scope document I'd been drafting for the Austin client, The acquiring company's regional team had reached out about a transition engagement, which was common in deals like this, and I had spent 2 evenings getting the terms right. The work was interesting. The rate was better than what Meridian had paid me. I didn't respond to the text. The 45 days between Kevin's office and the closing date were the quietest I can remember in a long time, not empty. The opposite of empty, but quiet in the specific sense of a life that belongs entirely to the person living it. I woke up when I wanted. I worked on things that were mine. I answered emails from Kevin and the acquisition team and the property management company I'd signed with for Cannon Beach, which had already listed the house and already had the first 2 weekends booked. I did not answer emails from anyone in Beaverton, because there were no emails from anyone in Beaverton, because they had not yet figured out that email was an option. Some people, when they lose their leverage, get louder. My family went quiet. I recognized it because I had been quiet in that same way for 15 years, and I knew what it meant. It meant they were waiting for me to fix it. I was busy doing something else. Kevin's text arrived at 2:14 in the afternoon on day 45. I was at the coffee shop on NW 23rd, the one I'd been working out of most mornings since moving into the studio. Good light, reliable Wi-Fi, a counter along the window where you could set up a laptop and face the street and nobody would bother you. I had a half-finished Americano and the consulting scope document open on my screen, and I was in the middle of a sentence about deliverable timelines when my phone buzzed. Done. Wire confirmation in your inbox. I opened my email. The confirmation was there. A routing number, a reference code, a dollar amount with more digits than I had ever seen attached to my name. I read it twice. Not because I doubted it. Kevin's work didn't leave room for doubt, but because some numbers need a second look before they become real. $2,847,400. Net after fees. I closed the email. I looked out the window at NW 23rd. A woman was walking a golden retriever that kept stopping to sniff a parking meter. A man in a rain jacket was unlocking a bicycle that had been locked to a sign for what looked like several days too long. The coffee cart across the street had a line of 4 people, which was about average for a Tuesday afternoon in October. I picked up my Americano and finished it. Then I opened a new tab and went back to the Austin apartment listings I'd been looking at for 2 weeks. I had found the one I wanted on day 38, a 1-bedroom on the east side of the city, 2nd floor, a small balcony facing a courtyard of live oak trees, hardwood floors throughout, available the 1st of December. The rent was $1,640 a month, which was $210 less than my Portland studio for a unit that was 40% larger, which was the kind of arithmetic I found quietly satisfying. I had not applied yet because I'd been waiting for the wire to clear. I filled out the application, attached my financial documents, which now included a very recent and very significant asset statement. Submitted it at 2:37. The approval came back in 40 minutes. I booked the flight that evening. Portland to Austin, day 92. One way. On day 48, Marcus called. He'd run into my father at the hardware store on Canyon Road, the one near the Beaverton house that Gary had been going to for 30 years, buying screws and caulk and replacement fixtures with the specific purposefulness of a man who believes that maintaining things is a form of control. Marcus said he'd looked rough. Tired in a way that sat differently than ordinary tiredness. He'd mentioned, when Marcus asked how things were going, that they were sorting out some bank stuff. I told Marcus about the buffer payment then. All of it, the $400 a month, the 4 years, the way I'd set it up through a third-party bill pay service, so it would show on their servicer's statement as a general payment, rather than something traceable back to me. I told him I'd canceled it on day 14. He was quiet for a moment. $400 a month, he said. For 4 years, 48 payments. And they didn't know. They received it. They didn't know where it was coming from. Another pause. I could hear him thinking the way I can always hear Marcus thinking. Not through any sound he makes, but through the quality of the silence, which is different from his talking silence and his listening silence and his I disagree, but I'm deciding whether to say so silent. This was the silence of a man doing math that ended somewhere complicated. And now the servicer is sending notices, he said. Apparently. And they don't know why the payments changed. They know the payment amount changed. They don't know why. He let that sit for a second, then, "You okay with that?" I thought about the question. It deserved a real answer. Yes, I said, and I meant it in the way I had come to mean things, not without cost, but without doubt. The yes and the cost were both true and didn't cancel each other out. On day 52, Marcus sent me a screenshot with no accompanying message. It was a Facebook post. Public, which I suspected was an accident. Amber had tagged the name of the mortgage servicer First Pacific Mortgage, spelled out in full in the body of the post, alongside a detailed complaint about their customer service hold times, and what she described as a payment discrepancy that nobody could explain. The post had 11 comments. 3 of them were from people recommending she try calling earlier in the morning. 2 were from people sharing similar experiences with the same institution. 1 was from a woman named Deborah, who had written "Only this happened to us too," with 2 exclamation points. I read it once. I set my phone face down on the desk. I looked at the ceiling of the studio for about 30 seconds, which is the amount of time I generally allow for processing things that are both predictable and still somehow surprising. They had found the discrepancy. They had not yet found the source. I turned my phone back over and opened the property management company's portal for Cannon Beach. The house had been listed for short-term rentals for 3 weeks. Both upcoming weekends were booked. A family from Seattle had left a message asking about a 4-night stay over Thanksgiving. I sent them the rates and availability. They confirmed within the hour. I did not respond to Amber's Facebook post. I had a flight to catch, figuratively speaking, and she was not on the itinerary. On day 55, I emailed Kevin to confirm everything on my end was complete. His response came the next morning. Clean on his end too, filing done, retention records in order, his invoice processed through the closing proceeds as agreed. 3 lines, no pleasantries beyond a single travel safe at the end, which from Kevin was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Day 58. Marcus and I walked along the Willamette. It was an evening cold enough to need a jacket, but not cold enough to be unpleasant. The kind of October evening that Portland does better than almost anywhere, the light going amber over the West Hills, the river holding the color of the sky, the Hawthorne Bridge lit against the dark. We walked from the East Bank Esplanade south toward Omsi and back, which is a route we'd walked maybe 30 times over 9 years, in various configurations of crisis and contentment. He had a coffee. I had my hands in my coat pockets. He asked if I was sure about Austin. The math works, I said. That's not what I asked. I thought about it for a few steps. The river was moving slowly the way it does when the current is stronger underneath than it looks on the surface. I built everything I have in this city around holding that family together, I said. I can't build what comes next in the same place. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, that's a good reason. It's the only one I need. We walked to the end of the esplanade and turned back. A heron was standing on a rock near the bank in the way herons stand absolutely still, as though stillness itself were a form of patience rather than an absence of motion. I watched it for a moment as we passed. Marcus asked if I would come back to Portland. Not if I would come home, he was too precise for that, but if I would come back. I said I didn't know. I said Austin was a good market, and the work was interesting, and the live oak trees outside the apartment were the kind of thing you couldn't plan for, but were glad to find. I said the Cannon Beach house would bring me back a few times a year for the property management reviews, if nothing else. He said that was something. I said it was. We walked the rest of the way in the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled, the river dark on our left, the city bright on the hills to our right, and I thought about the fact that in 34 days I would be somewhere I had never lived, starting something I hadn't finished building yet, with no one's overhead in my budget but my own. The math worked. And for once, that was not the most important thing I could have said about it. Marcus's text came in at 11:04 on a Tuesday morning, 89 days after my father carried my bag to the front porch. "Your dad's here," I called him. He picked up on the first ring. "What do you mean here?" I said, standing on my front step. "He's been here about 10 minutes. I looked at what was on my desk. The consulting scope, half finished. A coffee going cold. Outside the window of the studio, the courtyard with the bench, and the drain and the pigeon that had apparently decided this particular square of concrete was worth defending. "Is he okay?" I said. "He looks like he hasn't slept. Or has slept too much. One of those." I sat with that for a moment. Gary Reed was 62 years old and had been sleeping in the same house for 31 years, and had never once, in my memory, shown up somewhere unannounced. He planned, he decided. He executed decisions he had already made. He did not sit on other people's front steps for 10 minutes, waiting to see what happened. Okay, I said. I drove to Marcus's building on NW Lovejoy. I took the Burnside Bridge, which added 4 minutes but was the route I knew by muscle memory. And I used those 4 minutes to think about what I wanted to say and what I didn't, which is the same process I run before any meeting that matters. My father was sitting on the front step when I pulled up. He stood when he saw my car, the way men of his generation stand when a woman arrives automatic, trained in before he was old enough to examine it. He was wearing a canvas work jacket, and the expression of a man who has been awake since before he should have been. I parked. I got out. I did not walk to him immediately. He said, I didn't know where else to go. I looked at him for a moment. He was thinner through the face than I remembered. Or maybe the light was different. Or maybe I had been looking at him for 34 years and only now was seeing clearly what had always been there. Come on, I said. I walked toward the building. Marcus let us in and gave us the front room without being asked, closing his bedroom door with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood exactly what kind of space was needed and had decided to provide it without making anything of the gesture. There was a water glass on the coffee table. I didn't ask him to put it there. He just had. My father sat in the armchair, Marcus's armchair, the one with the red-glued arm, and I sat on the couch and I waited, because Gary Reed had come here and Gary Reed was going to have to begin. He talked around the edges of it first. This is what he does when he is wrong, moves in from the outside, approaches the center of the thing obliquely, testing the ground. He talked about the mortgage servicer, the phone calls Pat had been making, the payment history they'd requested, which showed a discrepancy going back 4 years that nobody at the bank could adequately explain. He talked about Amber's car payments, which they had been covering for 2 months now, $610 a month, which he said without inflection, but which landed in the room the way he meant it to. He talked for a while. I let him. When he stopped, the silence in the room was the kind that has weight. I didn't know about the company, he said. I know you didn't, I said. That's the problem. He looked at me. He had his hands on his knees, flat, the same position he'd had at the kitchen table 89 days ago, but different now, drained of the authority that had made it a position of power then. Now it was just a man keeping his hands somewhere, so they didn't betray him. How long? He said. 4 years. And the house in Cannon Beach. 3 years. He was quiet for a moment. We stayed there. Yes. Something moved across his face that I didn't have a precise word for. Not shame. Exactly something adjacent to it. Something that had been sitting underneath shame for a long time, and was only now surfacing because it had run out of room. Why didn't you tell us? He said. I had thought about how to answer this. Not in the car, not in the 89 days longer than that, the way you think about answers to questions that haven't been asked yet because you have been waiting for them long enough to know they're coming. Because the moment I told you I had resources, I said you would have made me responsible for allocating them. The same way you made me responsible for the buffer payments I set up 4 years ago without telling you. The same way you made me responsible for Amber's car loan before I had finished telling you I'd lost my job. He didn't answer. He looked at the water glass on the table. 3 things happened the night you packed my bag, I said. I was going to tell you about the acquisition deal at dinner. I had built a clause into the deal structure to pay off your mortgage and Amber's car, and I called my attorney the next morning and removed it. The silence that followed was the longest one in the room so far. It had a different quality than the others, not empty but full. The way a room is full after something falls and breaks, and the sound has just finished reverberating. You were going to, he started. Yes. And we? Yes. He put his face in his hands. He didn't cry. Gary Reed, in my experience, does not cry, he compresses, he absorbs. He carries things internally in the way of men who were taught that carrying things externally was a failure of character. He just sat there with his face in his hands for a moment, which was the closest thing to undone I had ever seen him. Then he lifted his head. I've been doing that to you your whole life, haven't I? He said. It wasn't a question. He said it the way you say something you have known for a long time and have been hoping, without any real basis for the hope, that you were wrong about. Since I was 15, Dad. He closed his eyes briefly. The $200, he said. You knew. Yes. And you never said anything. No. I gave him the silence that he deserved to sit in. Not cruel, I was done with cruelty by the time I arrived at this room, if I had ever started, but honest. The silence said, This is what you did, and we are both going to acknowledge it, and the acknowledgement is not the same as forgiveness and is not pretending to be. After a while, I told him about Austin. I told him the flight was in 3 days, and the apartment was ready, and the work was interesting. I told him the Cannon Beach house was under a property management contract and would remain so. I told him the First Pacific mortgage servicer had a hardship restructure program for borrowers in his position, and that the person to ask for was named Delgado in the customer advocacy line, which I knew because I had looked it up 2 weeks ago, on a night when I was not yet sure whether I would tell him or not. I told him to call before 10 in the morning Pacific time, because hold times were shorter before the East Coast lunch hour hit their cue. He listened to all of it. When I stood up, he stood too, the same automatic reflex, trained in deep. He looked like he wanted to say something that he didn't have the right words for, which in my experience is the most accurate description of Gary Reed at the moments that have mattered most. "Take care of yourself, Dad," I said. I walked to the door. In the hallway, Marcus was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his coffee cup in one hand, not eavesdropping, just present, the way he was always just present when it counted. He held out my coffee cup, which I'd left on his counter when I arrived. I took it. I walked out. PDX in the early morning has a quality that is particular to it and that I have never been able to find in any other airport. Something about the light, the skylights, in the main terminal let, in a gray-white Pacific Northwest dawn that is softer than fluorescent and warmer than overcast, and the Douglas fir ceilings do something to the sound that makes even a busy departure hall feel less like a machine and more like a place where people actually are. I have flown out of this airport 31 times in my professional life. I know this because I kept the receipts. I was at the security line at 6:48 on a Wednesday morning in November with a laptop bag, one carry-on, and a large coffee from the cart near the Seagate's Ethiopian blend, black, which they brew well, and which is one of the things I will miss about Portland in a specific and uncomplicated way that requires no further examination. The line moved. I moved with it. On the other side of security, I found the Powell's Books outpost near Gate C10 and stood in it for 6 minutes, looking at the paperbacks on the new fiction table. I didn't buy anything. I wasn't in the market for a story someone else had written. I had a consulting document on my laptop that I wanted to finish before we landed, and a second document of framework for the first 90 days with the Austin team that I had started and abandoned twice, and was ready now to begin again properly. I found a seat at Gate C14 by the window. The tarmac was still half dark, the ground crew in their orange vests moving around a plane that was being prepared for an earlier departure. A cart drove past with luggage containers stacked on it. A man in a reflective vest stood at the wing and looked up at something, decided it was fine, and walked away. My phone buzzed. Marcus. Safe flight. I looked at it for a moment. 9 years of friendship. 37 shared meals I could identify by name. 1 couch. 2 professional crises on his side and 3 on mine. And this was the distillation, 2 words, at 6:53 in the morning, which was more than enough. I typed back. I kept taking the loss so they didn't have to. I'm done operating at a deficit. 3 seconds passed. Go. I set the phone face down on the seat beside me and opened my laptop. The consulting document was 14 pages, and I was on page 9, which was the section about integration timelines, the part where the real work was. The part that required not just knowing the numbers, but understanding what the numbers were trying to say about the organization behind them. I had been a financial analyst for 8 years, which meant I had spent 8 years learning that the numbers are never really about the numbers. They are about the decisions that produced them, and the people who made those decisions, and what those people were afraid of when they did. I read what I had written on page 9. I deleted 1 paragraph that wasn't earning its place and wrote a better one. I moved to page 10. At 7:21, my mind went briefly to Beaverton, not to the house specifically, not to the kitchen table, or the split level, or the porch light that had been on when I left, but to the general fact of it, the way you think about a place you used to know your way around. I thought, what is happening there right now? I thought, it's 7:21, so Pat is probably in the kitchen. And Gary has probably been up since 6, and Amber is probably still asleep, because Amber has always slept until the situation requires her to be awake. I held the thought for a moment. I examined it the way I examine all things I'm uncertain about, looking for what it was actually made of underneath the surface. And what I found was this. I didn't know. I didn't know what was happening in that house right now. I didn't know whether the call to First Pacific had been made, or whether Delgado had answered, or whether the restructure conversation had gone the way those conversations can go when you approach them correctly. I didn't know whether Amber was still posting about banks on Facebook, or whether she had moved on to some other frustration. I found that I was okay with not knowing. That was new. Or not new, it had been building across 92 days. Accumulating the way interest accumulates, quietly and without announcement, until you check the balance one morning and it's different than it was. Some silences are voids you fall into. Some silences are just space room to build something that doesn't have to account for anyone else's overhead. I had been filling other people's space with my own substance for 15 years. I went back to page 10. The gate filled up gradually, the way gates do families first. Then the business travelers who timed their arrival precisely, then the people who had been at the wrong gate and realized it with enough margin to make it work. A child across the aisle was eating a muffin, with the complete absorption that children bring to food, the muffin requiring her full professional attention. A man in a gray suit was on a call, his voice low and careful, the voice of someone delivering information that the other person on the line was not going to enjoy. They called boarding at 7:49. I closed my laptop. I stood in the line with my carry-on and thought about nothing, in particular not Austin, not Portland, not the consulting document or the framework or the Cannon Beach house that would be hosting a family from Seattle over Thanksgiving while I was setting up a new kitchen on the east side of a city I had visited twice but not yet lived. I thought about the Ethiopian coffee and whether the place on the corner near my new apartment that Marcus had found on Google Maps and texted me without comment would be as good. I showed my boarding pass. I walked down the jetway. The jetway smelled like recycled air and the faint industrial warmth of aircraft systems doing what aircraft systems do, which is work continuously and reliably and without requiring anyone to think about them. I have always found this quality in machines quietly admirable. I found my seat. Window, which I had selected not out of sentiment, but because I work better with natural light on the left side of the screen. I put my laptop bag under the seat in front of me and my carry-on in the overhead, and sat down and looked out at the tarmac, where the ground crew was finishing the last of their work with the focused efficiency of people who do the same things correctly every day and take a professional satisfaction in doing them well. The doors closed. The plane pushed back. Portland moved past the window and then was gone, replaced by taxiway and then runway, and then the particular suspension of the moment before a plane commits to speed. I did not press my face to the glass. I did not look for anything in the middle distance. What was there to see that I hadn't already seen? We lifted. The clouds came up fast, thick November overcast, the kind that closes behind you like a curtain, and Portland was gone in under a minute. Below me somewhere was the Willamette and the West Hills, and a split level in Beaverton and a coffee shop on NW 23rd, and a heron on a rock who was probably still there, standing in the precise stillness of something that had decided where it was going to be and was being there completely. I opened my laptop. Page 10 was still on the screen, cursor blinking at the end of the last sentence I'd written, waiting with the patience of something that had no opinion about how long it took. I started typing. I had spent 15 years as someone else's safety net. As it turns out, a safety net pulled taut long enough becomes a cage. I cut the cord somewhere over the Oregon coast, at 34,000 feet, in the middle of a sentence about integration timelines, without ceremony and without looking down. Below me, somewhere in the clouds, Oregon looked exactly like what it was, something I had already paid for. If you've been the one who fixes things quietly, the one who covers the gap, absorbs the cost, and tells yourself that's just what love looks like, this story is about you. Not because you should stop caring, but because there's a difference between giving freely and being counted on so consistently that no one bothers to ask if you're okay. Danielle didn't stop loving her family. She stopped funding a version of them that had never learned to function without her as the floor. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. And clarity, when you finally reach it, doesn't feel like anger. It feels like setting something heavy down after carrying it so long you forgot your arms were tired. So ask yourself honestly, Who in your life has stopped asking how you're doing because they already assume you're fine? And what would change if you let yourself need something back? Tell me in the comments. I want to know.